Okay, excuse me. Okay, let's move on now to our next paragraph. Now, this is one that's going to be a little bit new with this essay. We haven't done this before. So let's have a look at what it will sound like in the sample paper, and then we can talk about how you can write it. All right, so I lost the sample paper here. Let's see. There we go. Okay. And close that. Boop. Okay. So there's our summary that we just looked at. So the next paragraph is this one. So you can see on the side, the text box on the side. Oh, hold on. 3, 4. There we go. Sorry about that. The text box on the side over here says what each paragraph is doing. Now, one of the things that you might find here is that you might need 2 paragraphs for this. So author source credibility might be its own paragraph. And then when we talk about the rhetorical situation, that's the audience, the purpose, and the context. Okay? We will see in this example, this paragraph's getting a little bit long. And if you have more to say about any of these and your paragraph's getting much longer, I would break it into 2. All right, so you can do whatever feels right. If you look at the planner, I had everything organized and now I lost everything. Okay, planner. I think is this it? There we go. All right, so here's the section we're working on here. Rhetorical analysis, okay? Author credibility, worldview, and bias, source credibility and bias, purpose, audience, context, and actually audience usually comes before purpose. You can flip-flop these if you want to, all right? And then here, could split paragraphs here if this is too much for one paragraph, all right? So right now we're just gonna bring our notes over here, and then when you start drafting, you can decide what you're gonna do. Okay, so let's have a look at what this will sound like in your paper since this is going to be fairly new. All right. Excuse me. Friedman's article appeared in the New York Times, a highly respected daily newspaper with a slight liberal bias. According to the website Media Bias Fact Check, the Times is, quote, considered one of the most reliable sources for news information due to proper sourcing and well-respected journalists and editors. So that is the information about the source, bias, and credibility. Like 2 sentences there. Friedman himself, so here's about the author, is a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist who, at the time of this article's publication, had worked at the Times for 23 years. According to the Times website, Friedman is an expert in international reporting, specifically on issues related to the Middle East. This background shows that he has some credibility in writing about this issue. So there's a couple sentences about the author. Now, one thing we don't see here that is on our planner is that bit about the worldview and bias. So that's lacking from this paragraph. So that would be something that you would add. All right. So that might make your paragraph get a little bit longer and where you would just talk about the source and the author in one paragraph. Now we get into purpose. His purpose in this op-ed is persuasive, in particular to convince his readers that outsourcing jobs internationally benefits not only the overseas worker, but also Americans. There's the purpose, all right? So is it persuasive? Pretty much all the articles we're working on are persuasive, but then in particular, what are they trying to persuade their readers to do or think differently? Based on the typical readership of the New York Times, the audience he aims to persuade consists of relatively affluent, college-educated adults, most likely with liberal-leaning political opinions. He might be aiming at people who are ambivalent about the outsourcing of American jobs. His audience also comprises people who value qualities like self-confidence and independence based on his emphasis on these qualities in his article. So there's our information about the audience, a couple sentences there. So what do they value? What's their kind of demographic? And go back to our lessons on audience from, I believe it was Unit 2, to kind of see where how you can kind of infer this. You're not going to know exactly, but you're going to make your best guess about who you think he's trying to reach, or who you think your author is trying to reach. So then context is kind of what's going on in the world that the author is responding to. The context in which Friedman wrote this article is twofold. First, he's reacting to the growing trend of outsourcing jobs. And remember here, we're looking back to when it was published. So this was 2004. So you might have to kind of look things up, like what was going on in that. Now, none of your articles are that old, so you maybe know what was going on at the time. But if not, you might have to kind of think back and, use your history or look things up to see what's going on at the time. The context is twofold. First, he's reacting to the growing trend of outsourcing jobs. Furthermore, he's writing in the context of growing fears about terrorist attacks from the Middle East, since this article was written only a few years after the 9/11 attacks and many other terrorist attacks had occurred since then. Friedman was also writing during the 2004 presidential election campaign, when both outsourcing and domestic security were major issues. All right. So that's the context and kind of the event or the exigence, what was going on that the author was responding to, what was on the author's mind and the audience's mind when the article was published. So that's what we're doing there. Okay. So let's see where you're going to get this information from. So we're going to, here's the planner, the main planner. Okay. You could remind yourself here, see Planner 2. I think I have that in the notes up above. Use information from Planner 2. Okay, so let's find our Planner 2. Boop. Here's the plain one. Okay, so author and source credibility. Again, go back and check your feedback on this assignment and see if I made any suggestions. All right. What's the author's background? How credible is the author? What's the credibility and bias of the source? Any concerns about the credibility or bias of the source or the author? Remember that if you're probably going to have to look up the author and the source. So if you take anything word for word from these sources, make sure you have quotation marks and make sure you at least have the link for the source where you found the information so that you can cite it when it comes time to cite it. Okay? Or attribute it to the source. So some of your information will come from here. Some of your information will come from here, where you looked up the worldview in the most recent lesson. And so this information, depending on how much you have, might be one paragraph. All right? And then this information might be its own paragraph. If you don't have that much to say about any of these, maybe you have one paragraph covering part 2, 3, and 4 from your planner, okay? Author's intended audience, how do you know? Author's purpose, how do you know? And what was going on in the world. So again, the context is new this time around. Can I turn this off maybe? No. Turn off. There we go. Okay. For this session. There we go. Okay, that'll help. So this is going to be new. All right. So I would recommend that you look at your feedback on this, see if I made any suggestions, and then you will bring that information over here, make any changes that you think you might need to make based on the feedback on your planner. Okay. I can show you my example here. All right, so here's my example of Planner 2. So I have my author, award-winning professor of entomology, many leadership positions in professional organizations, widely published in respectable journals and periodicals. I just have according to Wikipedia here. This is an appropriate use for Wikipedia. I know sometimes your high school teachers might say stay away from Wikipedia, but if you're just getting background information, that should be fine. Of course, if you ever have a teacher that says you cannot use Wikipedia in your paper, don't use Wikipedia in your paper. But in my humble opinion, for something like this, it's fine. He has a background. His credibility is pretty strong. The information was from a TED Talk, so generally pretty high. Depends on the speakers. No major concerns, but I just want to be aware of potential bias because it does tend to have a sort of progressive left-leaning bias. Okay. His worldview, he's an environmentalist, a globalist. He has a very scientific, rational worldview, might not always be the most practical. So he's going to be pro-environment, maybe anti-business. Okay. So that's my paragraph about the author. Audience of a TED Talk generally consists of well-educated, curious adults. They're interested in new progressive ideas. They're probably members of higher socioeconomic groups. Now, I kind of know that just because I've been working with this stuff a long time, but if I got this information from any source, I would state where I got that information from. Trying to persuade his audience to be more open to an insect-based diet. But I turned off Grammarly. In what context? Population growth, environmental concerns were some of the things that were happening. So this was my planner too. And here's how it will look on my overall essay planner. Okay. He has the background to discuss this topic. Here's those notes. Here's the bias. High credibility for the source. Here's what he's trying to do. Here's who he's trying to reach. Here's what's going on in the world that he's responding to. So really, you're just bringing the information from your planner and organizing it over here, making any changes that you need to make based on the feedback on your planner too. Okay? So I hope that helps. And if you want me to check that for you, I certainly will. And I keep losing my Screencastify. There we go. All right, I'll figure out how to stop this. But you can stop watching now. Is this it? No? Like that. Okay. I'm lost. There we go. Okay.